recommencer avec une session intitulée Cohabiter au sein des mondes universitaires. Je vais faire une rapide présentation en français pour introduire cette table ronde. Peut-être dire juste un mot pour dire d'où je parle. En fait, moi, je suis chercheur en sciences de l'information et la communication et en santé globale, rattachée à la faculté de santé d'Université Paris-Cité. Donc, quelque part, une incarnation aussi de cette interdisciplinarité. Et nous sommes très honorés, avec Bernard Reber, d'accueillir aujourd'hui un panel d'intervenants représentant différents instituts et centres interdisciplinaires engagés dans les enjeux de l'anthropocène et des transitions écologiques. Cette table ronde, elle vise à discuter des exigences spécifiques auxquelles sont confrontées les institutions académiques engagées dans des problématiques transversales. Le Centre des politiques de la Terre fait partie de ces instituts interdisciplinaires dont la mission est de faire travailler ensemble des chercheurs en sciences naturelles et expérimentales, en sciences humaines et aussi de la santé. Et parmi ces activités nombreuses, en fait, le centre a aussi engagé un certain nombre de visites à l'international auprès de centres et d'instituts interdisciplinaires qui se sont engagés aussi dans des approches transversales. L'année dernière, notamment, nous étions en Suisse, à Lausanne et à Genève. On a rencontré des équipes du Centre de compétences en durabilité. Nous étions à l'Institut des sciences de l'environnement et à l'Institut de santé globale à l'Université de Genève. Et cette année, on a complété en fait ces temps de rencontres et d'échanges par des visites à Berlin, Research Institute for Sustainability, le RIFS, à l'IRITESIS, l'Integrative Research Institute on Transformations of Human Environment, dont on aura plusieurs représentants aujourd'hui, et puis aussi au département de géoanthropologie à l'Institut Max Planck. Alors aujourd'hui, on souhaite explorer ensemble les défis et les opportunités liées à l'interdisciplinarité et engager les manières de favoriser une collaboration fructueuse entre les mondes académiques, militants et de l'action publique. Je suis ravie de partager l'animation de cette table ronde avec Bernard Reber, philosophe, dont les travaux portent notamment sur les responsabilités, l'éthique et la gouvernance du climat. Il est directeur de recherche au CNRS et membre du bureau du Centre des politiques de la Terre. Donc on aura, lors de cette table ronde, la chance d'avoir ici avec nous Steven Hartman, qui est le fondateur exécutif de la Bridges Sustainability Science Coalition. Et nous aurons aussi la chance d'entendre Gretchen Bach, qui conduit ses recherches au RIFS et à l'IRITESIS. Elle est aussi chercheure invitée à l'Institut Max Planck à Berlin. Qui est ici en ligne avec nous, ainsi que Rosella Alba et Timothy Moss, qui sont également chercheurs à l'IRITESIS. Et puis, enfin, nous avons le plaisir d'avoir avec nous Nathalie Blanc, qui est la directrice du Centre des politiques de la Terre, et Jérôme Gaillardet, également membre du bureau du Centre des politiques de la Terre. Je laisserai chacun ensuite se présenter du point de vue aussi disciplinaire. Ce sera aussi l'intérêt de cette table ronde qui va s'organiser en deux parties. La première pour aborder la cohabitation des disciplines au sein de nouvelles institutions dédiées aux défis interdisciplinaires et sociopolitiques. Et puis la seconde sera l'occasion d'envisager les responsabilités des institutions face aux défis communs, la nécessité en fait de répondre à une temporalité qui réponde à la contrainte de l'urgence et aussi la nécessité de considérer le besoin d'innovation. Voilà. Bernard.
Thank you very much. 5 minutes. We've tried to organize a bit the discussion like that. We will start with you, Stephen. Could you please answer to the first question, presentation of your discipline and disciplines, sometimes you have different one, and the necessity and the costs of the cohabitation with other disciplines, from the closest to the farthest. Was it more than cohabitation? Because we have an habit in France in political field of cohabitation, but it means you are from different parties, and you know, and you can use 2 minutes for that, and after that you can try. It's a kind of a game. You try to pitch your institution, Bridges, in 30 seconds, and after that you can answer to the question: what was the necessity and the main choices to build it, to build your network in 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Thanks very much, and I wish I could speak French, but I can't. So I'll do my best in English. My original discipline, and I was trained as a literary scholar, but I haven't done strict literary scholarship in many, many years, except I do kind of a more applied literary scholarship, because I've been working in interdisciplinary contexts for many, many years now. So I work most closely with geographers and with archaeologists and with social and cultural anthropologists, and sometimes with artists. And this is a result of the direction that not only my work took, but the work of a lot of people that I was networking with, who largely to begin with were literary scholars and historians, sometimes the occasional philosopher or art historian. But what we began to find was that this disconnect between, let's say, field-based studies of environment and environmental change and different approaches toward representing environmental challenges was very unsatisfying, because it seemed to be reinforcing this split that is between sciences and humanities in some way, but also between sort of conceptions and realities as they play out on the ground in terms of environmental challenges and the implications of environmental change. So I think that more and more we began to find ways in which these subjects, some of which were based more in social sciences, some of which sometimes went over even more into the natural sciences, sort of geosciences area, how more and more these sort of very different starting points could come together and enrich one another's understanding of their study subjects. And that's what that's the kind of work that I've been doing mostly for the past 10 years. So I'm a literary scholar who often works in the field more than in a book.
Is it possible to pitch your institution, Bridge?
I'll try.
Bridges.
So Bridges, we're starting with the exception, because Bridges really isn't an institution, it's a coalition. It's a UNESCO coalition of what we call humanities-driven sustainability science. And it sounds like a contradiction, and that's a provocation that's intentional, because our ambition is actually to have more successful integrated approaches towards sustainability challenges and study of sustainability challenges and understanding of them. And if we don't emphasize the humanities before we say sustainability science, the normative sustainability science community will forget the humanities.
Good, that's the pitch. And what was the necessity to build, and the main choices you followed to bridge this network?
Yeah, the main choices were that we felt the humanities, the arts, qualitative social sciences had a tremendous amount of knowledge to be applying to the problems that, let's say, our governments have committed themselves in theory to dealing with. Let's say the Paris Agreement and climate change, biodiversity crises, other kinds of pollution and oceans crises, and the knock-on effects of global warming and climate change in terms of wildfires and the way that these affect human communities, but also melting glaciers and so forth. So we felt that we had a lot to add, but our knowledge that was developing within our fields wasn't making it at all into the science policy interface. I mean, just not there at all. And partly that's because there have not been appropriate structures that allow our knowledge to be taken up and brought into those discussions with policymakers. And it's partly due to methodological reasons. We are contextual, often qualitative, and it's very hard using the metrics that get applied to in the science policy interface to be lifting that kind of knowledge up and generalizing about it. I don't know if that's my...
No, that's very good. That's very good, and we'll have time to continue. We'll continue with Gretchen back up. Gretchen, it's your turn. It's a pleasure to meet you again after a Berlin trip. Oh, the mic, please.
Je dis bonsoir tout le monde, j'ai oublié les questions.
La question c'est, can you introduce yourself disciplinary, and what was the necessity and the cost of the cohabitation with other disciplines? And you can name them. It's impossible to be a friend with everybody, so you have chosen. And after that, I will continue with the pitch, the institution, and perhaps for you, the institution may be a Max Planck or the other one, the RIFs, because you are colleagues, the three, in the same institution. It's clear for you? Good.
Yep. So I am trained as an anthropologist, and before that as a Sovietologist. And so I have a deep history of concern with major economic transitions, which are also social transitions. And I turned at some point toward the energy transition and have been researching for the last 10 years, things mostly to do with the integration of renewables into electricity systems. And I'm now looking at the opposite problem, the much more difficult problem of withdrawing oil, natural gas, and coal from energy systems. So not addition, but subtraction. And of course, I mean, I do this as an anthropologist, but I've always been interdisciplinary in my thinking. And I agree with Stephen completely that finding a way to bring qualitative research into conversations about the Anthropocene and sort of all that needs changing is an extremely difficult project. I also work a lot in the arts, and it's really hard to figure out how sort of to click in anything that makes sense in a world that looks like it's driven by policy, driven by science. To say like there's an affective dimension, there's a human dimension, there's care and loss and grief and love, and all of that needs to find a place for expression.
And was it more than cohabitation, what you've done with other disciplines?
I would say that it is more like moving from within a discipline into a new home, which is fundamentally structured by interdisciplinary conversation. So even though I have also one foot in European ethnology here, the place that I think best and the people I think best with and am in conversation with are those who are also trying to bridge between disciplines. Yeah.
Thank you. And which institution did you have chosen to pitch? It's the time for the pitch.
I'll say quite quickly. I came to Berlin from McGill University in Montreal, and I came here not knowing anything about the landscape. So I affiliated myself with everything.
Okay.
And this is
so
why
choose one to pitch to explain for the people who have not been in Berlin.
Yeah. And so I've been at the Max Planck in the Anthropocene Formations group for the last 5 years, and it is now becoming this Geoanthropology Institute in Jena. It's in between, so it's disappeared and it has not yet reappeared. So it's difficult to pitch. RIFS has also recently changed from being the institute that's in Potsdam, the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, to a Research Institute for Sustainability, and is being institutionalized under the umbrella of the geosciences. So it's a social science institute trying to understand how to work within the geosciences, earth system sciences, environmental sciences. So there's a lot of troubles with that particular project. And then there's the irritasis, which the others will talk about, which is also formed on the three-legged stool, which is getting bigger, of geography, anthropology, and agricultural sciences.
And taking advantage of the knowledge of 3 different centers, what were the main choices and the main differences to answer to these challenges?
Yeah, so the great thing about the irritasis, I will say, since I'm here with my colleagues, is that we are oriented around pedagogy. So it's really about training the future generations of scientists to deal with the interdisciplinary problems that face us. And I feel like this orientation has caused it to be a very, very successful undertaking. We understand the problems. We aren't necessarily trying to work interdisciplinarily ourselves. Some of us are, some of us aren't, but we're all very devoted to creating an educational program that will allow junior scientists to do that work. And it's great.
Thank you.
So,
thank you very much. And we can continue with Rosella Alba. Please, Rosella, introduce yourself, discipline, and the same questions.
Yeah. I put myself in the early career still research. I'm a postdoc at IRITESIS, and I have a very interdisciplinary background, and that's given by the fact that I study water mainly. So it's kind of a call for understanding how to quantify and understanding water flows, but also the social relations related with water and organizing around water. And that's why in my career, I move across different institutes that try to deal with water from an interdisciplinary perspective. I now have a PhD in human geography. And yeah, so that's, I want to say, out of necessity. And the 3 people here, we are all part of a working group that talks about infrastructure. And that's also a good example on how, talking about something that's out there and also very much involved in policies and in changing human environmental relations brought us to create an interdisciplinary group for the need to understand how infrastructure actually, how they are built, how they are managed, but also what they do in terms of urbanization processes and change in social relations. And well, that's it.
That's fine. And if you have to pitch irritasis, because it will be your task, for the room here, the people, the audiences, they have not been in Berlin, what would you say? And perhaps they will come to work with you there.
Well, you're very welcome. I don't see the faces of the people in the room, and that's a pity.
We are plenty,
IRITESIS, I mean, as Gretchen said, was born 10 years ago out of the need or the recognition that we need interdisciplinary work to understand better socio-ecological relations, but also to train a new generation of scholars. And we do have a graduate program. We do have engaged with master students and also with postdocs in training people in doing interdisciplinary work. I also think at IRITESIS we have a bunch of very visionary, creative committed people with a deep sense of care. And we just had our 10 years anniversary conference, and that was very clear to me that the institute I work in, and now I'm very positive, you know, but then there will be the second question, what is difficult to do actually. But we also experiment a lot with formats. So it's not only about writing academic papers, it's also about doing theater, play, exhibitions, try to reach the broader public in many different ways, with all the limitations that come with it. And this whole energy and the fact that we, as I said, is a bunch of committed people to try, that's what pushes forward. Also, when we are confronted with very difficult situations, and to answer the third question, that's more about what are the difficulties in doing interdisciplinary work and transdisciplinary work. I see as the main difficulty the need for structural change. So German universities are very disciplinary oriented, and departments are very strong, and there is a good historical reason for that. So it's not about you know, canceling disciplines, but it's about trying to open a bit structures to make interdisciplinarity part of the structures. And I did study in the Netherlands before, and there, you know, I studied water. I didn't study a discipline. So the theme was driving the master program I was in, for example. And this is still difficult in Germany. So I think changing structures is the task we are at. And also, but this is, you know, more of a, maybe it's not so hard to do, but it's creating languages. In my work, I now work with modelers, and I say, as I'm a human geographer who did ethnographic kind of work until now. The very difficult part is first, or we have to spend a lot of time to understand one another. And I think at the institute at IRITesis, we have done 10 years of work in at least, you know, being able to communicate. And at the institute, we have a particular take on interdisciplinarity that is not really about integration, but it's more about agree to disagree. But to reach this point, you really need to understand one another. And I think that's also very enriching, to even, you know, stay within your own discipline, but have a kind of communication and learning. And for a human geographer, that means turning critique into a constructive critique, and something that can help build something different. And this has been quite of a task, I would say.
Thank you, and you have already started to answer to the second question. We can continue with Timothy, please. Introduce yourself with the same question, the necessity and the cost of cohabitation with other disciplines.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks very much for inviting us all in. I'm Tim Moss. I'm actually training, I'm a historian and also a social scientist, so I've incurred various costs for integrating myself, basically, in terms of integrating myself into the sort of institutional setup that is often not conducive to this kind of interdisciplinary work you're doing. So I often work, I play to different communities. I often work with human geographers, have many for many times, and urban studies specialists in particular. My special field is urban infrastructure. So I too look at water, but also energy systems, like Quelles. So here is a field that seems to be sort of engineering oriented, but is now very vibrant amongst the social scientists. And in speaking to human geographers, I often try to encourage them to take on board new aspects of historical scholarship, or to appreciate history not just as a context, a kind of temporal context, but something you can think with creatively and constructively and critically. And conversely, I see myself as an intermediary from sort of human geography, urban studies, towards history, because history is notoriously concerned perhaps about being too conceptual, is rather reluctant to engage with theories and concepts. And so I see a lot of concepts, theories that are being used in human geography in particular, also in anthropology, that it could be of really valid interest to historians. So I see myself to some extent as a kind of an interface, an intermediary between those disciplines. And a lot of difficulties are involved there when it comes to publications, when it comes to applying for grants. In Germany in particular, we have a German Research Council that is very disciplinary oriented, which makes it very difficult to pitch an interdisciplinary project when you really don't know what kind of reviewers they're going to be asking in. If they're going to only ask reviewers from one particular discipline, then you're going to have real trouble with an interdisciplinary project. And to some extent also with journals, although one can play with that because you can publish in different kinds of journals. So I publish both in historical journals and also urban studies, human geography journals as well as environmental ones. Do you want me still to say something about our thesis? Gretchen and Rosella have said so many fantastic things about it. I can only underline, and I would only relativize the points that they made there. It's just a very supportive environment. It's very international as well. I think of our PhDs, we have about 65-70% are international. There's a very strong female component as well, which I think is very enriching. And there is also people who are very much involved in activism and so on as well. But I think we're going to come to that later on altogether. But the others have made such a great pitch for IRE thesis. All I can say, it is a fantastic place. I feel very at home there. So it's great for people of all different generations, including somebody of my age that is more in the twilight of their career. And that's also something we often don't think about. What happens at the end of people's career? How do people at the end of their career sort of are going to be enlivened, enriched to break their own boundaries, not only disciplinary, and go new places. And a lot of young people that are IRE thesis really help me do that, keep me on my toes, push me in new directions, and I really, really appreciate that environment.
And instead of doing a pitch for IRE's thesis, because you have been in Leibniz Institute, perhaps in 30 seconds, this Leibniz Institute, the differences compared, or perhaps it's not appropriate, they are not similar. Or you can take time.
I don't want to talk about my previous institute because it's 6-7 years ago since I was there.
Yeah, but
I will say that the Leibniz Association is an interesting construct in Germany, which is extramural institutes that are required by their statutes to be interdisciplinary. So they often provide a haven for people like myself who don't feel catered for by the conventional university structures. So this is what makes IRE thesis at the Humboldt University very special, because it is a cross-faculty project, effectively.
Thank you. And we can continue with the Earth Political Center with Nathalie and Jérôme, but perhaps since you are two and perhaps it's a bit more known here, you can share the 2 minutes in one each. And perhaps we can have two pitches.
In English or
and
in
take the
French?
bet. I think in English for our colleague, if it's possible.
When we created the Earth Politics Center, we did a benchmark trying to see how many centers there were throughout the world, and we found many of them, and many of them are bottom-up initiatives from academics. So it's not always, and it's not often even, an academic institutional initiative. So that's what makes the initiative very interesting. And the Earth Politics Center, why do I think interdisciplinarity is important? I did my PhD in an interdisciplinary manner, and I thought that interdisciplinarity brings the non-highlighted things into view, into light. For example, I worked on cockroaches at the time with ecologists and social scientists, and I understood much better of what was going on the dynamics of population of these animals that if I would have been alone. So for me, interdisciplinarity brings l'invisible dans la lumière. Et c'est une façon de rendre plus visible dans l'œil académique, en tout cas, un certain nombre de phénomènes qui resteraient inexplorés sinon.
Et Jérôme?
Yes, so
and perhaps your background.
Yeah, my background, I was about to talk about my background. So I'm a geochemist. I'm a geologist by training. So my motivation for being part of the Centre des Politiques de la Terre is that the Earth is becoming the subject, you know, and more, everyone is talking about the Earth. Everyone is making the very sad observation that the Earth system is not doing well. But actually, the Earth scientists are not there. And so I'm coming from the Institut Physique du Globe de Paris, which is a component of Paris University, and is part of the Centre des Politiques de la Terre also. I'm trying to convince my colleagues working on the environmental problems, but also working on volcanic issues and seismologic risk, that, you know, they need to engage with the other communities. I'm trying to convince my colleagues, and I haven't not been very successful, and Maud, which is in the room, can say the same thing, I think, that, you know, predicting the eruption of a volcano is not only a geophysical problem. You know, half of the problem is geophysics. You need to have a good mathematical model trying to tell you when the volcano is going to erupt and in what extent. But it's also a social problem, you know, because people are living on the volcano. Otherwise, predicting the eruption of the volcano wouldn't be a very interesting exercise. So I think we have a lot of work still to do to tell, you know, the scientific communities. I'm talking about the experimental sciences and physical, biological, and chemical science communities to get involved into more interdisciplinarity. The fact is, the laboratory life is a full life. I mean, it takes you 24 hours a day, you know, because we have big machines, we are involved in a intensive process of writing project, getting money, publishing the papers, presenting our papers into meetings, and where is the time left for, you know, doing something else and talking to other communities? I think this is the main issue. And finally, I'd like to say that, as you see, I have a certain age, and the youngest colleagues, it's very difficult for them to get involved, or to, even if they are interested, if they see the interest of being involved in interdisciplinarity, it's very difficult for them to come to be part of it, because, you know, they are not going to be evaluated on that. They are going to be evaluated on the number of papers that they have published within the year, and they are going to be evaluated on the impact that these papers will have. So this is, I think, fundamental obstacles against the interdisciplinarity that I think universities and the academic world in general should take seriously into account.
So perhaps you can have two pitches to do, one for the young colleagues to a pitch to let them come here, because it's really important, and the other one from the head of the IPGP. In 10 minutes, because, you know, you take the lift, you go to the restaurant in the IPGP, so you have not a lot of time, and you have to convince the young colleague one time and your boss.
You know, this is very kind of disruption that we are all living, which is that from a citizen point of view, we are all convinced that we need to do something for saving the planet. But from a professional point of view, we have no time to get involved into, you know, except if you are a militant, you know, militantist, how do you say that? Activist. Yeah. Which is very rare. I mean, there are very few activists around me in my lab or in my institute, just because, as I said, people don't have time. And from the direction point of view, okay, forget about your competition world. But, you know, competition is a key word that comes from all the ministries, I think, from in Europe, in the US, in China, etc. You know, everyone has to obey to this so-called competition law, which is running the world. So going out of that mental scheme is something which is going to take time and courage.
Thank you, and perhaps with this idea, I can sell or offer you a pitch for your director. If you like competition, the best competition now is against time. So you want to add something, because the two of you, Tim and Rosella, have already tackled the question of the difficulties, but perhaps get another point to add. Otherwise, we will open the floor with the people here. But please, if you have something to add, Gretchen.
I think they've covered it.
Yeah, so we have 15 minutes for questions. I think we have time for 10 questions, but I'm sure that you are totally exhausted. Okay, questions. French, German, English, whatever, Swedish? Because
I just like, I just like to ask the audience, I will rephrase it in French. We think at the Earth Politics Center that it could be interesting for the care of the Earth to create some network of centers like ours, which is once again a bottom-up initiative. And I would like your thoughts on the topic. I mean, what do you think of the fact that we could try to create such a network? And would it be more efficient than other initiatives? That's a question I'll let the floor lighten me with.
Yeah. Okay, there is one question. Yeah, proposal, counter-argument. 2, 1, okay. Introduce yourself.
Okay. So, my name is Sylvie Fanchette. I'm a geographer at RRD, which is a Research Institute for Sustainable Science. We are full-time researcher, and with a very, not for 6 years, or I've been for 30 years in this institute, so we have got the chance to have got a lifetime position. It's not a question, it's just a comment to say that in our institute, we are working on what we called les sciences de la durabilité, sustainable science, and there is a big focus on interdisciplinarity. So there are what they call community of sciences, called the COSAV, on the front of research, like the big challenges, like can be migration, climate, littoral and ocean, earth, and I mean, all these challenges, migration. And so in this institute, we have all the disciplines, for oceanography to anthropology. I mean, we are a minority in social sciences, but I mean, like a quarter. So what I want to say that we are working only in what they call the global south with our partners, and we can be expatriated for long years, a long-term stay. So for some years, there have been a big focus on these sustainable sciences, how to work together, okay? And there is like a new researcher who are comment on dit, des chercheurs qui sont...
In French, if you want.
Des chercheurs qui sont... Les candidats, non, qui sont recrutés. Like
Recruited,
him,
yeah.
Like him,
Yeah.
he's from the Sustainable Science Commission. It means that he's supposed to work on, at the same time, social sciences, at the same time on mining or environmental issues. And so when we are evaluated every 2 years, there is a part of what we are doing on sustainable science, on research, interdisciplinarity, workshop, and publication on these issues which are very important in our career. And so there is, what I can do is to share with you, there are 2 tomes of book on what is sustainable science unfortunately it's in French, in RRD. a lot of papers of experience of how to work together and how to address interdisciplinary issues like, I don't know, mangrove and climate change, or deltas, climate change and pollution. How those teams are working together, but not working only with academics, but working also with local authorities, NGO, and so. So they explain all the challenge and the interest. And so I think it could be very interesting if in the Centre des Politiques de la Terre you are really addressing those issues, that we can share what also we have done on this. And I mean,
Thank you for this additional comment. Questions or perhaps reactions from Germany? Stephen, you want to add something? Yeah, please.
I just have one question for you. How typical is the kind of institution where you are from your experience?
I mean, RRD was a really post-colonial institution which was working on Africa. Yeah. And so it was, the idea it was working too with institution Africa to increase, agricultural production, but in a social context. For 20 years, a lot of people say that our institute is too expensive for the government, and we have to be delocalized in the universities, but we are still here. And it's really rare, I can say, really rare, and but yeah, we have to go over the communication, blah, 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 discourse on what is interdisciplinarity. Okay, because there is now we are managed by managers, you know. Mm. So they want us to have a lot of likes everywhere, but we have to work with you, with different institutions, because we are really a top-down institution.
Okay. Thank you.
And he's like to speak.
Okay.
May I add? I just wanted to say that at our institute, we are organizing a summer school about water in the summer. And there are some French colleagues from IRD who are co-organizing the summer school. And it's indeed about interdisciplinary work in relation to water.
So the connection is already done. Please.
Yes, hello.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Jeremy Cave. I am from IRD as well. And I wanted to make a comment. I belong to a structure that is called Atelier d'écologie politique, ATECOPOL, Political Ecology Workshop, which was created in 2018 in Toulouse, in a sign of commitment with the ecological emergency, saying, okay, we scientific people, we must get together and try to change the way we produce knowledge and convey knowledge, because we are partly responsible of what's going on. So since over the past 5 years, we've been doing a lot of activities in Toulouse, but there are also similar structures that were created in other cities of France, Marseille, Paris, Rennes, Dijon, blah, 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 Montpellier.
Where is blah, blah, blah?
Sorry.
I think it's Paris, blah, 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 perhaps.
No, there are 7 of them, so I don't know if I mention each of them, but we recently joined all together for the first encounter in France. So I was wondering whether such similar structures exist in Germany, for instance, or any other European countries or elsewhere. And just to give more details about it, the first thing we made was to create a seminar where we systematically cross a social science point of view and a physical or natural science point of view on some subjects. And we also create like a corpus of diagnosis of the ecological situation at a global or local scales that we habilitate ourselves to convey to the public, even if it's not on our strictly disciplinary perimeter. So along these 5 years of existence, we haven't produced much research, and we are trying to do that from now. But what we have done is to situate ourselves at the interface between the academia and the civil society. And we are receiving a number of demands from civil society which we cannot cope with, because there are a lot of them. And so we feel that we are fulfilling a paper that is highly needed from society. Like, just to give an example, to make a bridge between the IPCC reports that no one reads and what local managers have to do at municipal level or at a small neighborhood area. So this translation between scales and tools for analysis. So I was wondering if any other similar initiatives exist, for instance, in Germany. And last point of this long comment is about the fact that, yes, social sciences are seldom associated in this science and policy discussion. And my point of view as a social scientist working in a geoscience lab is that we social scientists are very aware that our work is highly political, whereas my colleagues from from natural or physical sciences are convinced that their work is purely objective and scientific, and there is nothing political at all. And we just noticed that Mr. Gayade, you had this, how do you say, militant activist thing, because there is some uneasiness regarding this point, which is an epistemological point that in social science, in natural or physical sciences, seems to be completely not present at all in the academic background of my colleagues. So sorry for this somewhat messy comment, but
perhaps it was not so messy, I think. But it was a question for Germany. Who wants to answer from a German point of view? Does it exist, something like that, or same concerns, or you have something to add? Who wants to speak?
I can very briefly say something. There is, not as a part of our institute, but between the Technical University and the Art University in Berlin, there is a really wonderful series where they have a conversation on they pick one concept and they invite 4 speakers who use this concept. So for example, resistance, and then they have an aerodynamicist who talks about it, and then they have somebody who studies art posters, for example, come and talk about it, and they have somebody who studies the history of Germany come and talk about it, and each of them speaks to this concept from the point of view of their own discipline. And it's in a beautiful little space that's run by the Art University. So it's made like a kind of interdisciplinary performance, and it's the only thing that really reminds me of what you're saying, where this is not about changing the world, but it's about bringing people together and getting them to listen to each other in a pleasurable and sort of mind-open way. In North America, we have ethnography labs, and I think that they, in some ways, suffer the same demands that you're talking about, which is that local people come to the lab and they say, look, we need some help with this project. We want to know the history of a particular region that's being gentrified, a part of the town, for example. Can your students do this research for us? So it's this very pragmatic interaction between the university, often master's students, and the local community. And maybe the others know of things that are happening in Germany, but these ethnography labs are growing up all over in urban environments within North America, and then they're connecting to each other.
Thank you. And Stephen wants to make a comment from a universal point of view, because you speak from UNESCO.
Well, I will say that this kind of situation that I think we've heard a couple of examples already before has an interesting history. When you think about the development of the IPCC, for instance, The IPCC came into being with the rise of Earth system sciences and with the advancement of the sort of international geosphere-biosphere program and the development of that originally. So in the 1980s, you had this field sort of on the rise, and it was sort of tracking alongside the development of the IPCC, the first iteration of that, and the subsequent iterations. Now, what ended up happening, and I'm simplifying this just to keep it manageable, but one of the things that happened is that the life sciences people and the geoscientists were worried about the transaction costs of being able to agree with just with each other. So we're in the natural sciences already, and there was a decision, more or less conscious decision made at that point to keep the social sciences out of it because they thought it was going to be complicated enough just getting the life sciences and the geosciences to agree. And then they realized after that that this was a mistake. Because, and of course, there's a famous diagram called the Brotherton diagram, which sort of shows the Earth system with a little tiny black box of human activities way off to the right. As if that's, you know, that little black box was, they didn't really deal with it very much and so forth. And then this became understood to be a mistake. And part of the resolution to that was not to open up the International Geosphere-Biosphere Program to social sciences and humanities, but to create the International Human Dimensions Program, which was meant to bring the social sciences in. But the funny thing about that is that when they did that, they replicated the same mistake again and kept the humanists out. The social scientists then kept sort of the humanities scholars out. I mean, again, I'm simplifying this a little bit for effect, but there's an interesting sort of tradition of understanding, basing from an idea of science, a particular idea of science. And I think that the idea of science that has supplanted that one, and that I think we're beginning to see more and more signs of, is one really in line with the Wissenschaft conception. That does not sort of create this sort of area over here that's true sciences and everything else is something fuzzy and something different, and it might be nice to do, but you know it's problematic. And we're living with that, and we're going to be living with that for a very, very long time. But that then has a logic to ideas of interdisciplinarity that with a long legacy as well. So I'll end on this point as far as this little iteration, this little intervention. It's creating a language is absolutely essential so that natural sciences and can speak with humanities people, can speak with social sciences. We often have the same terminology, but in our discourses, it's not always used in the same way. So we have to have this kind of lingua franca that we're developing, and we have to develop at least a competent understanding of how this language gets used in the different discourses and so forth. We're not creating a new specialized discourse, because it's really hard to breach or to sort of do away with those really entrenched meanings in specialized discourses. But as we do that, you know, and as we begin to explore interdisciplinary methodologies, the institutions and the structures are not keeping pace with that. Because even when you have calls for interdisciplinary projects, the reviewing is not actually applying state-of-the-art interdisciplinary methodologies or understandings of how this is produced. And therefore, that's reflected in all sorts of other structures, the way monies flow within universities and so forth. So I think that nothing short of a wholesale restructuring of a lot of these institutions is going to really result in truly progressive, innovative, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work, because nobody wants to pay for the real costs of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary work, and that's the hard work, learning to be able to speak and understand one another and be on the same page.
Thank you, and
can I come in with an example from
sorry.
Germany to respond to that,
Yep.
about an institution innovation that I think has been incredibly effective in promoting interdisciplinary work specifically on sustainability science. And that is the program of what they call social ecological research that has been promoted by the Federal Ministry of Research and Education in Germany for 20 years now. And that is basically, it was initially set up to try and promote the research institutes like the UCO Institute, the ISO Institute, that were very ecologically oriented, to give them a kind of basic funding. But it's had the impact of creating a whole generation of young researchers, and now not quite so young researchers, who now have professorships and beyond, who have been ingrained in education on social ecological research. And I've been an evaluator of that project. I've been part of that with 2 or 3 projects as well. And I've really been impressed by the ambition of that scheme. It runs into various difficulties that was just referred to now, that Steve was just referring to now, in terms of where it hits against other institutions. But it has been very important as a kind of what they call in Germany, Impulsgeber, giving a kind of impetus and creating, as I say, a whole generation of researchers who know nothing else but interdisciplinary research of that kind. So it's drawn in quite a few engineers in particular, who now realize that in order to get good bids through, it's really important to get social scientists on board. And I appreciate the point about the humanists. The humanities people are often not on board yet, so they're still being forgotten. But I think if I'm just responding to the question previously, if you're looking for an example from Germany of an institutional innovation that has really tried to promote interdisciplinarity at this interface, then I'd look at that program.
Thank you. And we can move to the third part, I think the most tricky one. We have no disagreement. So there perhaps we will reach some disagreement, and we will follow your point, Jeremy. Institution responsibilities to common challenges, change of speed, and need for innovation. So please answer everyone to this question. The general question is, how do you see your center's work in relation to socio-ecological transformation, and how do you bring together the words of academia, activism, public action, policy advice, in transition trajectories, especially if the environment crisis requests faster action? Who wants? Germany first. Rosella, please.
Yeah, it will be also my last statement, because unfortunately I have to leave because of family duties.
Oh, that's why I let you.
I'm being part currently of something that's called a postdoc academy for transformational leadership, and the theme so it's a group of postdocs across European universities that meet regularly for 2 years and try to figure out how to navigate the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary academic system. And this year's theme is racing to climate justice. So it's actually totally in line with what you're saying. And what I see is actually that what I'm learning, that a lot of us are actually calling for more reflection. So to actually stop and think about what we are doing. Which kind of research are we doing? Is this really responding to the kind of questions that also Jeremy maybe brought up? Is this the kind of knowledge that's needed? And it's the university, the only place or the place where this knowledge should be produced. So it's also a career question for us as a postdoc. Shall we stay or shall we leave? Also in terms of, which kind of impact we can have within university. I think there are different levels. I'm pushing forward the program where we actually reflect with modelers about modeling. So I embrace this working with natural scientists. And I would like to say that we should be a bit careful in going beyond this homogeneous field of natural science and social science. This is doing harm, I think. I have been working with very inspiring modelers with whom I had to learn to talk because I'm not a modeler. I don't know anything when I see this coding screen. But we have been trying to think relationally towards modeling, to use ideas of situated knowledges. So it's about working together not only to integrate data sets, but actually to develop a different way to do models. So I think, I mean, in the room, there are lots of people who are actually, a lot of us who are actually working with natural scientists. So there are brilliant people in the natural science, and I think we should cherry pick and, you know, tell these people, please, you be our loudspeakers within your communities. And I'm trying to be the loudspeaker within the critical political ecology people who, you know, have a very hard time to turn critique into a constructive way of working with natural scientists who are maybe not critical, but there are a lot of people who are willing to open up the debate. So I think that's the level of where I see that we are doing a lot of work at our institute. So between scientists to work together to a different kind of knowledge production. And as I said earlier, we at the institute experiments also with a lot of different approaches, methodologies that you know, where we try to be more approachable by the general public, and that is having being part of an exhibition in a museum in Berlin that's organizing talks. I'm looking at Tim with his history guide of Berlin. So also trying to translate our knowledge to the outer public. And to answer also to a comment before about time and reward, what I learned last week, we just had our 10th anniversary conference, is that more and more people are looking beyond the kind of strictly academic rewarding system. This is a lot about impact that at least that generation, maybe it's a bubble, and it's probably a bubble, but a young generation of researchers that are engaged in interdisciplinary research want to have. So it's not enough for the researchers themselves just to write papers. So the eventually the rewarding system will change, and we might not get jobs out of it. And this is the bottleneck. But a lot of people are also willing to leave academia or collaborate with academia. You know, we were talking last week with colleagues about being a satellite. So, you know, being within academia and outside academia at the same time. I don't know how this is possible, and this is all to be researched together, I would say. But opening space to experiment, that I think it's essential for institutions, like institutional spaces to experiment. I think this is essential. And thank you a lot, everybody. And I hope our pathway will cross again.
Yeah, you have to look after the new generation.
Yes.
We have cherry-picked clever people coming from natural sciences in the Hearst Political Center. Like Jerome, for example. Jerome, would you answer to the question, what are the place of academia, activism, because you know the word now, public action? No, it's because they've said that before. Policy advice. No, please.
No, I just wanted to say that there is an answer to the question how to move forward, how to make people meet. I do think that there is a way which is very efficient and promising, which is to meet around places, like situated places. And I have the experience now for 10 years working into this field of critical zone observatory. And I observe, my observation is that it works. I mean, if you choose a place, which in that case is an instrumented place, you can then have a good opportunity to make different communities meet, because they have in common a place. Each one comes with its own vision or perspective on the site. For example, I'm just taking concrete examples. You have an hydrologist, which is looking at the motion of water. You have a geochemist, which is looking at the conception of CO2, the CO2 cycle. You have a geomorphologist, which is looking at the evolution of relief, a bacteriologist, etc. And all these people, they speak different languages, but because they have to work on the same system and they have to understand that system, they're going to try to make a translation work in order to be able to communicate. And this applies to the natural sciences communities, but it also applies, it can be extended to a social science community and to the stakeholders community. And at the European scale, we are involved, I say we because it's 28 countries, in the construction of a big network which is called Terre, Terre, which is a network of long-term socio-ecological observatories in which natural sciences, social sciences, and stakeholders are going to be involved very locally on very specific questions. But from that very specific questions, we hope to be able to increase in generality, to upscale the relationship between the land, the territory, and the care we need to have on Earth. So I do think, just to conclude, that a way of addressing this complex problem of, the scientist is not the only one that has knowledge, the indigenous people have a certain knowledge on their land, etc., is to group the people around situated observatories, so-called observatories, and engage into a long-term, work.
Thank you. But to continue with this question and to put it in another way for Natalie, do you make any difference, any distinction between academia activism, public action, policy advice, and respective responsibilities? Or now it's, with the speed, you have activists or something like that. People, they come from university and perhaps they are a day in a demonstration to fight for something. Yesterday, for example, no, so it was only a joke. Please. It's a French story.
It's tracking me because I'm following Soulèvement de la Terre, that's why. But whatsoever, I mean, when I engaged with my PhD at the time.
It's not working.
That's not working?
You can, want to use that?
When I engaged with my PhD in the 90s, it was about nature and city, and I came from fine arts, and at the time, picking out the subject of nature and city was in itself being engaged. So I would say, and I worked on animals in cities at the time, and especially on cockroaches, because I wanted to raise the issue of the dark nature in cities, not the green one whatsoever. So that in itself was an engagement, because I never aimed beforehand to get into the institution with such a topic, because people used to call me Mrs. Cockroach. So, it's not a way to get into CNRS whatsoever. But so what I mean to say is, if you choose certain topics and if you create, for example, the Earth for Politics Center, it's a way of engaging yourself, your institution, your knowledge, in producing a certain kind of knowledge, depending with whom and how you do it. But certainly it's not neutral, and I think no production of knowledge is neutral. So that's a way to answer. After, if you say, well, the only activist that I recognize is the one which is which aims to destroy whatsoever, a dam or other things, you reduce what is activism and engagement. Engagement is a vast question, as I said yesterday. It's a way to bring your action into the world and try to transform it. And you can transform this world in many ways.
Thank you. Thank you. And perhaps, Timothy, you want to add something, because you have been involved in your career in regional development and structural planning, and perhaps there has connection between knowledge and decision making and things like that. perhaps it's not appropriate to choose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the institute where I am now. There's all sorts of different ways in which we do engage with practitioners or the public in general. And I think it's good that we do it in different ways because, you know, for different people, different academics are comfortable with different kinds of work. And setting these things up as opposites, I think is not very helpful. So we do have quite a few activist scientists at the institute. They actually produced a discussion paper that you might be interested in at a summer school a couple of years ago, which was entitled "How Activist Should Scientists Be?" And it takes the form of a kind of interview with people giving their opinions on their positionality and the kind of relationship between impartiality and activism and so on. There are other people who sort of co-produce their research with practitioners. So the actual design of a research project is made not alone by the scientists, but in close collaboration with planners, with farmers, with NGOs, with administrative officials, and so on. I've been involved in several of those projects myself. So it is designing them up together with that. And there are various dangers and risks involved in that. You have to maintain your independence as an academic, but it nevertheless makes for a research project design, which you know is going to be of some relevance because people who are thinking it's relevant were there from the beginning. And then I think there's another group of people who like to create a kind of platform. I think Lucella was talking about this, a kind of platform or a space, a kind of protected space. It's like how I like to describe it, where practitioners, particularly people involved in decision-making roles, can kind of take time out for a half a day or a day and just reflect on what they're doing against and sort of play it against the sort of state of the art of research in their particular field. And I think that's very valuable because you were referring to this initially, Ben, in the sort of framework of we need to do these things fast because things are moving fast. And in a way, I think that this kind of moments of reflection, although they do take some time out of these people's work, actually save time in the long run because they're actually, hopefully, creating the foundation for better decisions and decisions that are more future-proof because they've thought through the implications, for example, in terms of the social impacts, political impacts, and so on, with the help of some scientists. So I'm very keen on that myself. Last sentence, I'm very keen on sort of mobilizing histories for use to combat future challenges, particularly related to infrastructure. So that's something I'm discussing with museums, for example, but also with utility companies in Berlin, engaging with them to see what kind of history, what kind of analogies from history can be useful to inspire or irritate current practitioners today.
Thank you. And then Stephen, perhaps to put it in another way, UNESCO is the place for academians or activists, organization, public actions or policy advice?
Yeah, well, I mean, UNESCO is the place where the academic world, where the research world, scientists, knowledge producers in sort of formal institutions can come together with education specialists, which we already have that in universities as well, of course, although often bifurcated in ways that are also reflected in how these different missions are funded. But what I think UNESCO brings also is the civil society in a strong way and also diplomacy. So access to, for instance, ministers as well. And so those interfaces between scientific production, education, cultural stewardship, as well as environmental stewardship and policy, make UNESCO a very important kind of site for where you can be bringing diverse strands together.
Thank you. Perhaps you have not totally exhausted, you have questions to address, otherwise...
Il y a le cocktail.
Non, oui, le cocktail, bien sûr. Il y aura l'annonce du cocktail, rassurez-vous. Non, mais before that, if you have no question, it's interesting not to spoil our time. I will ask you only one simple question. What did you learn in this 1 hour and 30 minutes? Perhaps we can start with, who wants to start? Elle a besoin de boire, Nathalie, vous voyez. Perhaps Stephen, one idea you've got during this very exciting discussion, conversation.
I suppose one of the things that was not totally surprising, but pleasantly surprising, is to get a sense from the participants of just how much things have moved along since the last time, let's say, we really seriously began to take stock around 10 years ago or so. Around the time of the big failure of the COP in Denmark, everybody was sort of saying, you know, what's just going on here, you know, and there's a lot of stock taking. And fields like the environmental humanities took off from there, more and more interdisciplinary and increasingly transdisciplinary fields. And I heard it reflected both in this panel, but also in the questions and the examples coming from the audience. And that's a very encouraging sign.
Thank you. Nathalie, before you drink.
Well, I guess.
1 point.
No, I guess that I learned that engagement is a very important issue of all our centers. I mean, not only academic one, but also, I mean, more global one. So that's something I reflected upon yesterday night, but still I find it again very, very forcefully said today.
And Gretchen, please.
In some ways, I feel like we, not just us in this room, I mean, the virtual room, are all kind of engaged in the same project now anyway, which is how to change a world. And people come at it from different sides. So I find it heartening, the ways in which there's sort of attempts to institutionalize that and how different those attempts are, and that we can speak across them and learn from each other. Concretely, I feel like this idea, I mean, I'm an anthropologist, but this idea of rooting a research project in a place where the discipline, the team sort of comes together and thinks and does in common with the people in a place is really appealing to me. And that is in part because it's my methodology to begin with, but we work alone. And there's something really nice about thinking about all of the people you need on a volcano to understand what it means to know a volcano and the effects that it has, and to take that as kind of a guiding light toward my own research, or how I interact with the people in my institute and beyond is a nice thought.
Thank you. And Tim?
Yeah, I think following on from what Stephen was saying, I think it's nice to see that it's meetings of this kind have shifted from times where it was just like meeting and moaning, when interdisciplinarity was the topic. Everybody just got together and talked about how dreadful it was. And there are some problems we're encountering, but what we've heard about today are some really promising and insightful examples of how to move forward, how things are moving forward already. So I think we've changed gear. We're in a new place now. And it's important to reflect on that and exchange a bit more, not only on the problems we are still encountering, but all the opportunities that are being created, or primarily by a new generation of research that are coming through.
And Jerome, to
yes.
the round table that is not round.
Yes, I do believe in networks. I think we are stronger when we work together, and I think that at the European scale, at least, we can constitute, we know already, I think, to get a network, a European network, informal. We don't need, structures, but at least, communicate each other and meet each other in like summer school or fall school or winter or spring schools. Any excuse is good, and yeah, be connected.
Yeah, thank you. And to not to sum up, but some ideas. We have seen that we have done different choices to tackle the same kind of challenges. It seems that it's impossible to answer to these challenges without the cooperation between different disciplines. I'm not sure it's always inter because the cost is very high. Timothy said it's, you know, when you have already two disciplines, it's a hard work. But taking Jérôme's proposal, okay, we can have a common space to share, and we have the different disciplines. And since we are speaking about habitation, I think disciplines is a way to habit, and I think we have to recognize it. I remember this anecdote, the old bachelor, who was very open to pluralism and these kind of things, answered to a young scientist, it was a colleague of mine, what do you think, Mr. Bachelor, about interdisciplinarity? And you know, it was very exciting. And the old bachelor said, I don't know what is interdisciplinarity, but I know what is indiscipline. I don't know if it's the same thing in English. So we have different ways to be responsible, to be responsive, and to respond according to our disciplines. And I hope we can cope not only with the disciplines in Paris, we can have bridges with bridges. I hope so. And I know that Germany is not very far. It's a train distance, perhaps bicycling distance for us, for the radical among us. And we hope to continue the cooperation with you. And thank you for having attended here and for your, you know, you're very patient, 30 minutes, but okay, you know, we are French. And for Nathalie, we want to have a drink and a cocktail for everybody. You are welcome if you take your private jet, I don't know. But we have an exhibition, you know, the program. It's near, just here, Béton Salon, and we will have a cocktail. So I've been said that it will take around 20 minutes for the exhibition, and after that you can have all your time to continue the conversation. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.